I know what it's like to pour months into a fundraise and still end up with nothing because I failed 2 times and had to shut down both of those startups before I finally cracked the code in my third one and raised $16 million. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 3 game-changing tactics I learned from those failures so you can avoid my mistakes and actually get the funding that you need for your startup. So let's get straight into it. And honestly, I had to learn this the hard way. When I tried to raise those first 2 rounds and failed, when I say that, I really mean it. I failed so badly. The first time, I didn't meet a single investor. And the second one, I met about 5, and none of them wanted to invest into me. They rejected me pretty much always by the first or second meeting. Now, before we get into the 3 main cheat codes, if you want to learn how to get fundraise for yourself and get actionable cheat codes every day for 30 days, then click the link below or comment raise and I'll send you the link and you can get them all for free. But back to my failed raises. At the time, I thought I was never going to get anywhere. And what I realized after raising the 16 million is that I was failing so much because I was not doing the right things in a raise. I was cold spamming DMs and emails, hoping something would stick, and not realizing what I actually had. And this was because I convinced myself that I didn't have a network and was too scared to actually work on it. And this is so common. And 90% of the founders I speak to every week say the exact same thing. Like, I don't have a network. I can't do this. I don't know what to do. But because I knew I couldn't fail for a third time, I actually flipped my approach in my third startup. And from that point was consistently meeting over 50 investors every time we decided to raise. And that's really what brings us on to what cheat code number 1 is. And to make this simple for you, think about how you'd meet someone interesting at a party. You wouldn't just walk up cold and start pitching yourself about how great you are, right? You wouldn't do that. No one would do that. Maybe you ask a friend to introduce you, or you go in there and you genuinely have a start a conversation, because suddenly you're not a stranger at that point. You're connecting with what you're doing. You're a friend of a friend, and now the conversation just flows because there's inherent trust built in and you're not being transactional. And it's exactly the same with getting meetings for investors. Warm intros are the key. One of the best ways to get warm intros is if you reach out to portfolio CEOs instead of going directly to investors. What you're doing there is you're using that friend at the party move to get a warm intro, not just barging in cold and just going straight in and asking everything, telling everything about you. And look, this isn't just theory. Take Hatim, a founder I worked with. Instead of blasting cold emails to investors, he reached out to CEOs in the portfolios of his target funds. One conversation led to another. Before he knew it, he had real warm introductions to the right investors. That was a core part of how he landed his $1 million round, by starting with portfolio CEOs, not the investor, and not going as direct. And what he did is he didn't go direct to investors, but rather got of investors a list of investors he liked, found companies they had already invested into, and then spoke to those founders and built a connection with them. But how do you do this then if you're not Hatim? To start, what I want you to do is pick 5 anchor funds. So 5 funds that you want to get introductions into that you don't have yet. For each, list 5 portfolio CEOs, that's 25 people, that are doing similar things to you but not a direct competitor. And then I want you to send them direct DMs reaching out, either as a general conversation or ask them about their experience with the fund you want. So I'll put this in the description, but an exact DM you could say is, you've loved your posts on a specific thing. We're tackling it for something similar. Let's jump on a call and help each other. Or if you're going specific about that investor, something along the lines of, and you need to be careful with this one, but you can do it. Hey, we're starting a round soon, and this fund looks like a great option for us. All right, if we jump on a call and chat about how you found them. And if you can do this weekly, what happens over a long period, this is profound. Think about it, in just 1 month, if you do 5 funds times 5 CEOs over 4 weeks, that's 60 shots a month of finding a warm introduction. And you can scale this pretty aggressively if you need. You can double that, you can triple it, you can do it over multiple months if you have more of a long-term thinking. But there's one common mistake I want you to avoid when you're doing this is taking these calls and just being transactional. You're not going into these formal instructions. You're going in to give as much value as possible to these portfolio founders and really build out a network of your dreams. That's how you win this cheat code. So now you have more warm introductions. How do you make sure you work properly day to day in activating these introductions and operationally doing your fundraise? Because that's the hardest part about a fundraise, is doing those things. And that's exactly what cheat code number 2 is. Because in my first 2 startups, my fundraising was chaotic. And I can imagine yours feels like that too. I was just winging it, squeezing in calls and emails whenever I had a spare minute, hoping something would stick, being happy that I got one investor meeting at one point, but then none in the next week, and then none in the next week, and then suddenly 5. There was no structure, there was no plan, just a never-ending to-do list, because I didn't have a clear timeline or weekly targets. I kept missing things, important things. I didn't know what I'd already done, what I was supposed to do next. And even if I was moving forward and moving the needle in my fundraise at all, it was very much like trying to build a rocket ship whilst already in the air and wondering why I can't get to Mars. Again, coming back to my 3rd startup and realizing these failures and having to fail 2 startups, I changed everything. Instead of just doing fundraising every day, I picked a launch date for my round and then I worked backwards. So I mapped out every step, every week, so I knew exactly what needed to happen and when. And suddenly, I had momentum. Suddenly, I was doing the work I needed to do because I could see where I was strong, where I needed help, what was falling through the cracks every week, and the things I needed to do at certain times. You need to think exactly the same for your fundraise. You'll never raise if you just rely on hope and hustle and day by day, because you're going to be missing out on so many things you're meant to be doing, and things are going to fall through the cracks. And if you want your best shot at success, if you want your best shot at finding the quality investors you need structure, prep, and momentum. And the only way of doing that is by building a timeline from the day you want to meet investors and working backwards. Think of it like a training for a marathon. If you just jog whenever you feel like it, you're never going to make it to race day, and you're never going to do the race that you want to. But if you have a set date, a training plan, check-ins every week, you know where you need to be at every week, you've got someone to help you with that as well, you're just going to be getting stronger, faster, and actually cross the finish line in a time that you care about. That's how you make sure you don't let your race drag on forever. By treating it like a campaign with a launch date, a public launch date, and a weekly team cadence to create urgency, accountability, and the most important thing, results in what you're doing in your fundraising preparation. But then how do you do this like a top 1% founder? What I want you to do is this. I want you to pick a launch date. And when I say a launch date, I mean the first day you're going to be having investor meetings. Then I want you to work backwards from that. So work backwards from that date, what you're going to be doing the week before, the week before, the week before, the week before. So, getting the connections in what you're doing, activating those introductions, the prep work you're doing before with your narrative or your network, and go through at least 2 to 3 months. Then what you need to do is you need to set up I call it a Monday management meeting. And this you'll be doing this through the fundraise as well. Set up a Monday management meeting for 30 minutes every week, rain or shine, so that you can see what you're doing right or wrong with that timeline you've built. Preferably with someone in the team or someone else external who can help you look over all this stuff and give you viewpoints on that. And what happens is that every Monday, you and your team or someone in there is going to hit quick agenda points. So your pipeline count by stage, intros needed this week, what's happening in the fundraise. And then what happens when you're actually fundraising, that moves into the fundraising management meeting. But every Monday, what you and your team are going to do is they're going to hit 5 quick agenda points once you're in the fundraise. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to do the pipeline count by stage. So looking at the pipeline, what does it look like? How are we building it out? The second one is what intros are needed this week, or how are we looking in terms of the beginning parts? The number 3 is which follow-ups are due, language, timing, dates, what's happening. The deadline language to send, where are we at in the fundraise, what language do we have to do to push investors onwards? And then 5 is blockers. Where is it being blocked? What is it? Is it to do with your external signals? Is it to do with certain things in the business? Where are we making investors not be interested so we can work on them? Because most founders treat fundraising like a pile of tasks. But without a campaign, without a timeline and a countdown for what you're doing, there is no urgency, and you'll not do the work that you need to do. And from that point, you're just going to start losing momentum and time. And this is truly where fundraisers are lost, because you're not keeping on top of everything and you're not doing the things that move the needle. And suddenly you launch a fundraise and you've only got 10 investors you're speaking to max. You haven't prepped the right answers in the right manner. You haven't built a process that moves people to term sheets. So if we do these two cheat codes, by now you'll have more meetings, you'll prepare and launch and operationally conduct your raise in a much more structured way. But what about when you actually jump in calls with investors? How do you make sure that they invest into you? That's what this last cheat code is, which was a game changer for me when it came to my fundraise, because I finally knew what I was doing right or wrong in investor meetings. And when I was helping Keith raise his round, he kept running into the same wall because of how complex his business was. Investors would pass, but he never really knew why. The feedback was always kind of vague, so he couldn't put his finger on what wasn't landing, what was, and how he could actually move to a position of where investors would want to invest into him. So I asked him to do one simple fix to his investor calls, and it drastically changed his funding round. What I asked him to do is started to use the last 5 minutes of every investor call to ask two simple questions. First was, what questions do you still have about the business and the raise? And the second one was, if this were to move forward, what's the next steps on your end? Almost instantly, patterns started emerging. Investors got stuck on the same things. Questions Keith hadn't realized he'd left unanswered, by the way. And suddenly he knew exactly what to fix in his pitch and also in follow-ups. And because we always locked in a concrete next step, the process actually never stalled. And that's how Keith went from confusion and stalled deals to raising £1.7 million just by tightening the end of every call and really deeply understanding how investors actually felt about him. And that's exactly what this cheat code is. Making sure you end your calls with questions. But how do you do this? So you're usually going to have a 30-minute investor call. And what founders usually do is they don't track time and they just let the 30-minute meeting go by. And there's a whole kind of meta aspect around how you need to keep yourself as the leader of the meeting, and you should be doing that anyway. But what they don't do is they don't end the meeting in the right manner. So let's say it's a 30-minute meeting. At the 25-minute mark, you should say, hey, we've got, even if you're still talking about the business, that's okay. You're never going to be able to get through everything in the business. At the 25-minute mark, you want to say, hey, we've got 5 minutes left. Do you have extra time after this so we can keep talking? Most likely they'll say no. If they say yes, so great, you've got more time. But if you don't, then you say, okay, well, I want to talk to you a bit more about how you feel about the business, any other questions that are needed, and also about the raise. So then you want to ask about your company. So what questions do you still have about the business and the raise? And if they have questions that they don't know, or they're actually assuming stuff that is actually wrong and you actually have explained it, you can objection handle there. You can spend a couple minutes, actually you're wrong there, it's actually this, or, actually, interesting that you think that way, but it's actually this. A lot of the time they come out of this with assumptions that are wrong and they reject you for that. And it's a great way for you to actually handle those objections in a much better way. Now, the second thing I want you to do is I want you to ask about the next step. What is the next step? When does it happen? Stay silent and let them answer so that these are the things I need to answer. This is the next steps and we're creating it. And then you have it. And if you have time, immediately follow with, how would you explain this in 20 seconds to your colleagues? Because what happens is a lot of the time with VCs, so this isn't for angels, but for VCs, they're going to be going to their colleagues and they're going to be talking about your business. And if they stumble, their colleagues may not want to jump in with you and you may fail that first meeting, not because the person you spoke to dislikes you, but because they haven't been able to explain and clarify your story. So it's a really great way for them to understand if they're getting it right or wrong. And you could say, actually, no, you should say it like this instead when they go to their colleagues. And then in your follow-up email, you're going to have a much better understanding of what to follow up now and a date to follow up if they haven't got back to you. And it just sets up everything in a much better way, and is a core part of how you can actually fundraise correctly. So these are the 3 cheat codes I learned whilst raising $16 million for my startup I wish I had before. If you implement these 3 properly, your chances of successfully fundraising absolutely skyrocket. Now, if you want to learn how to implement the exact system I used to raise these rounds, then check out my next video where I go into detail how we do that together.